It's known that Jeff Bezos is the first person in history to be worth more than $200 billion, which makes him the richest person on this planet Earth. He's making $13 million per hour, but stay with us to find out about one person in history that was worth even more. Today, we're going to talk about how the richest man ever spent his trillions. He was so wealthy that people couldn't even calculate it. No one ever reached that amount of money in history, nor is going to reach it in the future. We're talking about Mansa Musa, the wealthiest man in history. We're about to learn how he actually gained the fortune and also on what he actually spent it. Back in the 14th century, in Europe, when the bubonic plague was spreading all across the land, destroying cities and killing 1/3 of the continent's inhabitants, the city's streets were full of trash and actual diseases, as the one that we mentioned spreading among the people in those areas. Those were times where no one would want to be born in, but when compared to Africa, it was actually the exact opposite. There, the economy was on the highest level ever. Universities were being built, mosques were being constructed. Also, one of the most important things, art has been created and has been spread all around the continent. And here it comes, Musa Kita the First, or also known as Mansa Musa, Musa Emperor of the Mali Empire in 1312 BC. Under his rule, this kingdom was enormous, stretching, believe it or not, over 2,000 miles, and in the middle of his kingdom, there have been found unbelievable resources that made Musa incredibly rich. At that time, this man was ruling with half of the world's gold, so just to compare, if nowadays someone was ruling with half of the gold in the world, that would be worth even more than $5 trillion, which is actually 2 times the GDP of the UK. But of course, it was not just gold that Musa was ruling in this enormous empire that was stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Sahara Desert, and in between having huge rainforests, plains, and enormous resources. The biggest part of the fortune was due to the salt deposits and the elephant ivory, which were great sources in those times. At the time when Musa sat on the throne, this kingdom was already wealthy enough, and of course, his goal was to extend it and make it even more wealthier, so it included 24 cities such as the town Timbuktu and many others. Due to that, the kingdom was able to trade easily and more freely than ever. This man loved conquering and earned an enormous amount of resources. Some he kept only for him, but the rest he spent for his beloved country. If you were wondering what he was actually doing with these resources, we can say that he was spending them in various ways which can make many envy him. If you want to really know how much this man was wealthy, you need to carefully observe one of the most pretentious displays of his wealth while he was on the actual throne. Pilgrimage to Mecca. If you didn't know, Musa was actually a Muslim, like most of the people in Mali were. And while the biggest part of the Muslims was finishing their pilgrimage to Mecca, we must say that literally no one in those times did that in such a lavish way as Musa did. He, of course, was not traveling as everyone did on camels, sweating and dehydrating while being exposed to the sun. On the contrary, he traveled in such a comfort that was unimaginable at that time. He was accommodated in a plush space that Musa didn't even have to set up by himself because, as wealthy as he was, he had his own entourage, which was actually big as its city. It was known that there were 60,000 people traveling alongside in his caravan that included 1,000 attendants, 500 attendants were there to serve only his head wife, and 500 slaves that were holding something that you couldn't even think about slaves to hold, and that's a golden staff. And each golden staff was weighing 6 pounds, and if being more detailed, for example, that's 3,000 pounds of gold. But guess what? Of course, that was not the sole gold on his journey. 100 camels were each carrying 300 pounds of gold, and that would cost around 30,000 pounds. How crazy is that? And if being estimated to compare it with today's gold, exactly that much gold would be estimated at $888 million. Jaw-dropping! And of course, not to forget the golden staff, plus with them, it would be $970 million. That's almost $1 billion, and of course, that's all the fortune belonged only to Musa. But this man wasn't just owning gold and fortune, but he owned people too. He had thousands of slaves that were serving him in many ways, which says a lot about how wealthy he actually was, and precisely the importance of this journey. They also had strict rules of clothing, especially the female slaves that were wearing brocade and also Yemeni silk gowns, which in that time were hard to possess, and were also something that slaves were not that used to wearing. On the same exact journey were also a large number of camels who were actually carrying different materials, silk, and necessities for the group. What's more, they stopped in various foreign cities to make huge shopping where they were buying different lavish clothing, food, etc. And while the world was in huge poverty and in the middle of a huge war, Musa was spending his fortune like there's no tomorrow. But something you may never think of is that this man was known as a real humanitarian, giving money to the poor and various organizations. When coming back to his kingdom, he decided to collect various architects, musicians, and artists to grow the cities in any way possible. He also built numerous palaces, universities, mosques, and even more. For example, the Cingurubur Mosque was one of the largest and most magnificent in the entire Africa, which can be still seen even nowadays 700 years later. It has literally withstood the test of time. This mosque was the creation of a famous architect and cost 440 pounds of gold or $8.2 million. We can also single out the Sankore University of all others. Musa strongly believed in the importance of a good education. This university could have 25,000 students, which compared with nowadays Harvard University, the Sankore had a bigger capacity. It had one of the biggest libraries in the entire world. Also, it's known that it had around 400,000 and 700,000 manuscripts, while some suggest that there were more than 1 million of them. Even though this man spent so much fortune on building his empire, he wasn't shy at all when it comes to spending some fortune on himself. Even though his palace is no longer existing and we don't know what it looked like, we find nearby kingdom palaces that can give an example of how his palace actually looked like. Most of the palaces were the size of one whole city, including villas, audience halls, courtyards, official apartments, special places for royal family members, and the well-known apartment where the royal was residing. It possessed huge bedrooms, dressing rooms, private audience rooms, a huge courtyard with magnificent gardens, and of course, harem. The place also included worship temples and even ceremonial lakes. And of course, we know how much they appreciated art and gold, so you can imagine the walls being full of magnificent crafts and covered with the most lavish materials, including gold and other precious materials. So after all that was said, we can conclude that Musa had such a huge fortune that it was hard to even be calculated. In fact, no one ever succeeded in finding out the exact number. We can conclude that he was living such a lavish and outstanding life many would only dream of. On a related note, we wanted to know which part was your favorite one from our video. You can tell us in the comment section below. If you like more videos like these, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any of them. And as always, thanks for watching, guys.